Hello, everybody. This is Jim, and welcome to Everything Under the Sun. Before we get started, I want to send a shout out and a big thank you to Tony Herdman and Fresh Air Entertainment and their staff for providing us with this great studio that we're doing our shows in. And now, let's get to it. He is considered rock royalty. He is a musician. He is a journalist. He is a record producer, and he owns his own record label. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Don Thrasher. How you doing, Don?
I'm good, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's get into it. You're a Dayton rock and roll through and through, Dayton music through and through. You have been a supporter, a member of everything for so many years. What got you into it? What got you into the music? Were you a journalist first, or did you want to be a journalist first, or did you want to be the musician first?
I wanted to be a musician first, but the reality of that was way far beyond something I could do at the time. But I've been a music fanatic since I was a little kid, and I always loved songs, always loved records. I mean, for like Christmas of my second grade year, I got Mama's and the Papa's Greatest Hits and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. So, I was already getting like that kind of stuff. My parents were pretty supportive of my music love. So, and it just kept going from there. But, I didn't really start playing in bands until I got out of high school, as far as rock bands and that kind of thing.
But you were in the marching band.
I did
in high
marching
school.
band and concert band before that. My introduction would have been playing the snare drum in the concert band. And
Yeah.
so my friend Mark Smith said, "Man, I'm going to join the band." And I'm like, "That sounds cool. What are you going to do?" He said, "I think I'm going to play the drums." I'm like, "All right, I'll try this." This would have been fifth grade. And we got in and tried out, and he didn't like it at all, and he quit like 2 days in. But I found I kind of had a facility for it for some reason or other. I could keep a beat, and it made sense to me. So I kind of stuck with it. Although I never even sat down and played a full drum kit until my senior year of high school. So it was all just learning the rudiments. And I still think my kick drum foot is my weakest thing that I have, just because it doesn't have the extra years of muscle memory and experience I did doing the marching band and concert band. But it was a good experience. I grew up in Alabama until I was 15, small town. So it was one of those things where I played sports. I played baseball, basketball, and football all the way up through, Pee Wee football and Little League and all that stuff, as you do in a small town. And we all love music, and once I got into concert band, you could still play sports and do all that stuff too. So I just did all that stuff. Then when I moved up to Centerville as a sophomore, coming into my sophomore year, it was a big school, and there's no way I was going to play football anymore. So that was the end of my football career. I looked at the band, and excuse me, it was good, big, really talented.
They've won national championships. They've won. Their Centerville band is one of the most respected high school bands in the state, if not the Midwest.
Right, absolutely. So it was a little intimidating. So all I focused on was basketball at that point. So I'm sorry, guys, I'm losing it here.
Well, it's So this was late '70s, early '80s.
Late '70s. I graduated in '81. So yeah, excuse me, late '70s.
Yeah. So what kind of music were you listening to then?
Um, the radio was big, so anything that would have been on the radio in the '70s, whether it was pop stuff or stuff they were playing on like the more adventurous, like FM radio stations. But for me, the Beatles has been like the biggest thing in my life.
Right.
And still, I don't see how there's anybody bigger or better than the Beatles. It's like everybody else is playing second fiddle, and that's cool because there's so much great music. But they did it all first, and I think they did it better than most people. And they had a lot more variety than most people can get away with today. When you do that, people think you're not focused and a little too eccentric if you don't have like a style or something like that. But they could get away with whatever they want.
Right.
So, I was just a big fan of the '60s, like whether it was the Stones or the Who, the Yardbirds, the Animals, like all that stuff, the Pretty Things. That's what I was obsessed with until I found punk rock, in a senior year in high school. And so that was life changing. A buddy of mine took me to his house, and his brother was gone, and his brother had an amazing record collection. They lived in Germany, and he had all this crazy punk stuff and weird new wave stuff. But he played me the first Clash album, the first Elvis Costello album, and the Peter Tosh album, Legalize It.
Oh, yeah.
He just got that. So he played me those three things, and it pretty much blew my mind. And that was, I mean, literally life-changing. Like, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today without the idea with punk that you could do it, that anybody could do it.
Right.
So that was huge. And I've never looked back, you know, much to my detriment sometimes.
And we get into it. The punk comes later on in your life because the Dayton scene in the early 90s was very punk influenced and a lot of other scene, but we'll get into that in a few. So you're in the high school band and you're doing all that. What was the first band that after high school that you played in?
It was called the New Creatures, and that was a punk band, and it was with Greg Demos and Bill Hustad, who were neighbors of mine. We lived on three separate streets, but you walk through the backyard of one people's yard, and that's where Bill was. Walk through the other way, and that's where Greg was. And we formed our first band together, and we put out a couple of cassettes, a 7-inch, a full-length album together. We played all over the Midwest. We actually did a tour down through the South, went and played Atlanta, Athens, Georgia, north all the way up to Boston, and played the Rathskeller in Boston.
Oh,
And we played with the Liars and Gargoyle. This would have been about 86.
Yeah.
And do you remember Gargoyle? That was B.B. Buell's band, who was with Todd Rundgren and
Yeah.
Steve Tyler before that. So Liv Tyler's mom.
My first punk show was 85, and it was Agent Orange, Circle Jerks, and Bad Brains.
Oh, wow.
That was my introduction at the Boathouse in Norfolk, Virginia.
Wow, that's amazing.
My influence for punk was I love the Minutemen.
Me too.
But my favorite punk album, a lot of people know this, is The Replacements' Pleased to Meet Me.
Oh, really?
It is one of the, it's 16 songs, and it's about 20 minutes long.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So,
you don't have to tell me about The Replacements, sir.
Yes, yeah. They changed a lot. So was punk as you moved on? Was that your major influence as you moved on to the other bands, or did
Well, it's funny because with the New Creatures, it changed really fast. Like when we started, we were like really influenced by like the Damned, the Clash, the Jam, like the British stuff, and that was not in vogue in '82.
No.
Like it was hardcore was coming into fashion, and we were not. We had short songs, fast songs, but we had melodies and guitar solos and that kind of thing. But you know, I mean, in the New Creatures, I mean, they're opening band for bands like the Minutemen, Raw Power at the Jockey Club, and stuff like that. So we were Toxic Reasons. We were very much in that mix. But then we kind of went through this weird hardcore phase, and then it kind of pre-grunge almost by the time we got through, like Screaming Trees, kind of almost.
Oh.
So it changed a lot, but there was always kind of a little psychedelic garage kind of influence in there too, which goes back to, you know, my love of the '60s stuff.
Well, after that description, I'm gonna have to check them out. If they gotta be out there somewhere.
So yeah, we got
Little Creatures, everybody.
New Creatures.
New Creatures.
Yeah, which comes from a Jim Morrison poem.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the Lords and the New Creatures. So so that was my first band, and I stayed with the band up until like '88, and they stayed together for a little bit after that and made another record. But I'd gotten married. I got married in '87 and I was working a full-time job. I was at Standard Register, which I worked there for 8 years doing credit and collections. Talk about soul crushing.
Especially to a rock and roller.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you went to Wright State.
Yeah, I did.
In that time frame too, also of the
when
80s.
I was with the New Creatures, I would have been going to Wright State, and dropped out of school for a little bit, bounced around a little bit, went back to school, got involved with the radio station there, which was huge. I met my wife through that. She was actually dating another guy, and once they broke up, I was there to, you know, swoop in, as they say.
Give her a shoulder to cry on.
Well, I don't know about that. It was actually a few months later, but I had my eye on her, let's say that way. Yeah, so.
Well, at the time, the Dayton scene is still, a lot of people don't know, and I've said this many times, is that the Dayton scene is one of the best music scenes in the country.
Oh yeah, hands down.
And now we're going to get into where to me at the time, next to Seattle, Dayton was probably had the most going on. From like '89 to like '95, '96, Dayton was. You had Real Lulu, you had the band that you were in, Swearing at Motorist. Another band that you were in, Guided by Voices, that came out of Ohio, Dayton. Brainiac that came out of Dayton. Can you, for people that don't know what it was like, what from '89, because you worked for 8 years, but in that time frame, you were in Swearing at Motorists, correct?
Not by that point. I left around the time of Swearing at Motorists. No, I think when I joined Swearing at Motorists, I was at Dayton Voice, so I'd left. I'd left the corporate gig, and I was writing.
Okay.
So, but well, to backtrack, like in the early '80s, like we started the New Creatures in '82. There wasn't a lot of people putting stuff out. Like Toxic Reasons, Dementia Precox had 7 inches and albums. But in the early '80s, it wasn't a thing that really happened. It was expensive. And for whatever reason, not a lot of stuff came out. And it was like that through the '80s. There'd be like maybe, if you're lucky, 6 or 7 releases a year. Even that includes cassettes and everything. Not a ton of stuff. Once you got into the late '80s, early '90s, it exploded.
Yeah.
So it was just like where Nirvana exploded large. It was kind of a microcosm of that here in Dayton. Like it carried over everywhere. So that kind of stuff was very much in vogue. I mean, it was the top music at the time. Hair metal wasn't the thing anymore. It was like the major labels were looking for indie stuff, and it's always who's the next Seattle, who's the next Chicago, who's the next Boston, because Dayton's great, but I mean, don't forget, like Boston's huge, Chicago's huge, Seattle's huge, and they had great scenes and still do, and by mass, just crazy. But per capita, what comes out of Dayton is still just mind blowing.
Yeah, you go back to the early '70s with the Ohio Players and Lakeside Drive, and then in the '80s. Your punk band, and there were other bands that came out, hair metal bands, as you would say, came out. Then in the '90s, you had those 4 bands I just mentioned that were coming out. 2000s, we've had The Works and Scotty Bratcher and Noah Witherspoon that are representing us really well. I'm sure there'll be some more that we can talk about.
So many, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, with just in the hip hop general too. But the period is so you're working at Standard Register. Were you playing in any bands during that time?
Yeah, I was with the New Creatures for a little bit because I'd started when I was still at school at Wright State. I started working full time just because an opportunity arose. I needed the money, so started going to school at night and finished that up. But I was still playing with the New Creatures, and then I played with this group in Yellow Springs called the Hopefuls for a little while. We put out a couple cassettes. And when I was doing that, that's when I first started recording with Guided by Voices. So we had met Bob with the New Creatures. Like, I mean, this story's been told before, but we were playing at the Building Lounge, which is now Jazz Central on 3rd Street. Okay. But it was called the Building Lounge at the time. And it was a neighborhood bar, and they would have people from the neighborhood would be hanging out, but they had these weird punk rock shows too. And they would have touring acts come through and local bands, and we were playing there. And our bass player broke a string. Bill broke his bass string, so he had to change his bass. That never happens. Like if you go to a lot of shows, that's the least likely thing to break is a bass string. A snare breaks almost more often than that. But anyway, so he's changing that, and we were a punk band, right? But while he's doing that, Greg starts playing "Nature's Way" by Spirit, which is an acoustic song because he had an acoustic and he picked it up and played it. And Bob Pollard jumped on stage and started singing backing vocals on the song. And I knew who he was because he was in Guided by Voices. I'd seen him. The first record was out, Forever Since Breakfast. It had been released. And I'd seen him a few times. I'd seen him with the Liars from Boston at Jilly's downtown. I'd seen him at Brookwood Hall and a few places. So I recognized the guy. But I'm like, what the heck is going on? And never met him before because he's a few years older than we are, So started talking after the show. And he's like, oh, yeah, I got a new record. It's called Devil Between My Toes. Here's some copies of our new record. Thanks, man. And we just hit it off. We became friends, and we ended up making our Rafter Tag album as the New Creatures at this place in Northridge where Bob was making his records. He's like, this guy Steve Wilbur has an 8-track studio in his garage. That's where I make my records. Come do it. We're like, sure. Okay, we did. And Tobin Sprout, who was in and out of Guided by Voices, at the time was not, had a band called Figure 4. He also made his record there. And so we all put our records out around the same time and became friends. And, we would hang out and talk about music and that kind of stuff and bullshit. And Bob had stopped playing by that point. He was just making records. He had made 2 records already after The Devil Between My Toes when he called Greg and I, Greg from the New Creatures. He's the famous Greg Demos of the Striped White Pants, and he's been in and out of Guided by Voices for a long time as well. Bob called to see if we would want to play on your record. Boy, do I! I mean, I love Guided by Voices. I mean, I was a huge fan. It was very influential on what was going on in my head at the time. It's everything I love: catchy stuff, weird stuff, with a little bit of the '60s thing. It's like 100% down my alley. So to get a chance to play on records with him was a dream come true, you know. But the crazy thing was, it was not a band. We got together, we drank beer, we rehearsed in Bob's basement. We went in and we made the first record with Steve Wilbur, where we'd been making the other records, on a super hot day, summer, actually not a day, on a series of days. And blast, it was so much fun. Made this record, put it out. A little while later, he's like, I'm going to make another record. Let's get together. We got together, made Propeller, which turned out to be a pretty huge record.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, he called it Propeller because it was going to propel him to stardom, but that was completely tongue-in-cheek. In reality, it was going to be the last record. He's like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And so we made this record, and it's now considered a classic. If you get one of the original pressings with the handmade covers, they go for a lot of money.
And it was recorded in a garage.
Some of it was recorded at Encore Studio,
okay,
which at the time was in the Oregon district underneath where Ned Pepper's is. It's bounced around to a number of places. Now it's over off of 3rd Street. Different ownership. Jeremy Mix wasn't involved then. It was the previous owner. But we recorded at Encore, and the guy did not get indie rock at all. I mean, you're talking, what, 92-ish, I think? 90, yeah. And, he did not have any concept. Like, distorted guitars, you know, weird things. Like, it just, like, did not fly. That's why a lot of the stuff was finished in the garage or on 4-track in the basement, like all over the place. Like that stuff has things that were recorded over at Cro-Mag. It has stuff that was recorded at Encore, stuff at Bob's house, stuff at Jimmy's, like all Toby's, probably, I don't know, all over.
That is mind blowing to me. So let's get, okay. So he's talking about, in case you didn't know, Guided by Voices, which is one of the most critically acclaimed band. I think maybe the most critically acclaimed band to come out of Dayton. Played 2 albums with them.
2 albums and a few songs on B-1000, the one after Vampire on Tires.
But you did not ever play a full show with him.
Yeah, we didn't play any shows at the time. There's no photos. We didn't do any photo shoots. There's a little bit of video because it was easy to have, like, you know, cheap video cameras. So there is footage of us making Same Place the Fly Got Smashed and some of us making Propeller. But no, never played out until later on. I got a chance at the very final show. I got to get up with it. He had a lot of people from the past in Chicago. He did 2 nights on New Year's when the band broke up for the first time.
And I think there is video of this.
There's a movie or whatever. Yes, there's footage of that. Trader Vic brought a bar on stage, and it was quite a to-do. And so that was fun. I got to go up and play I Am a Scientist, which is off of B-1000, which is a super popular song and something I'm still honored to be a part of. He's written a lot of great songs, but that's one that people seem to love. It was on an episode of How I Met Your Mother. So that's kind of my claim to fame in the background in one of their college scenes.
Well, we talked about the story of how you played the drums.
That's a totally different story. Yeah, that was before that.
Yeah, because you said you never played a full show.
Yeah, but I did fill in for Kevin Fennell in St. Louis at George Washington University, I want to say. I think that's what it is. It was a big outdoor show on the quad. Literally 1,000+ people there. And I was in town with Swearing at Motors. We were playing the River City Music Festival, I want to say, in St. Louis. Mississippi River Music Festival, that's what it was. And so we were there just watching Guided by Voices. We had some time off. They were playing this big free show that was unrelated to the festival. And I'm up there up front, and all of a sudden I see Kevin's wife come up to me from the stage area, the side of the stage. She's like, come here, come here. I'm like, what's going on? Come here. All right. Kevin's really drunk. Can you get up here and play? I'm like, what are you talking about? What? She's like, you got to get up here and play. Kevin can't finish the set. So by the time I get up stage, he's nowhere to be seen. I don't know where he is. So I sit down. I don't even know. Like, he's calling in. I know these songs because I've heard them, but these are songs I've not played on or played with or anything. And so I'm making my way through it. And Bob looks back like, who is, it's just like, was probably one of the most perplexing moments in his life. Like, what is this asshole doing back here with me? Yeah, so I played a couple songs and he's like, we got it. This is it. We got to go. So that was the end of the set. But
Yeah, that's a great story. I Guided by Voices. I told you I was living on the East Coast. They were huge on the East Coast. You brought
oh
back
yeah,
such an old band, the Liars. Oh, that was a great band from Boston. I
oh
saw
yeah,
them in local. I saw them at the Middle East
oh yeah. I played in the Middle East too. Yeah.
with the Mighty Mighty Bosstones when they had their throwdown. They used to do it every Thanksgiving. But at this time, as you're playing in these bands, you somehow start writing for Dayton's version of a alternative
Right. Yes.
newspaper.
It was called the Dayton Voice at the time, and I was still working at Standard Register.
Well, how did that? How not? I didn't mean to interrupt. How did? Well, you were going to answer the question.
How did that happen? Well, I mean, I was on the school newspaper in high school. My dad was in the newspaper business. He started from delivering papers to being an ad guy. He was not a writer. We moved up here because he was the publisher of the Centerville, Kettering Oakwood, Centerville Bellbrook Times. So that's why we came up here, and then he moved on, did other newspaper work elsewhere. So second generation, last generation, because who knows when newspapers how long they'll be around. But so I always wrote, like I was a writer. I took creative writing in school. At Wright State, they didn't really have a journalism program, but I tailored it. You could tailor it to what you want. There's a lot of journalism classes. So I got a bachelor's of arts degree. It was heavy on the journalism, but also creative writing. I did poetry writing and all that stuff. So I've always written. And when I was at Standard Register, and all this stuff was going on with Guided by Voices, and everybody wanted to talk about it, and there was a lot of cool stuff going on in town, I started doing this little fanzine called Trapdoor Press, and it was a little two-page thing that I think statute of limitations are up. I would copy at work on their printer for free, and it was just a little two-page thing, and I would just drop it off low-key because I was already like almost 30 years old, and I was like, I'm way too old to be doing this. I don't want anybody to know I was doing it. So I would take it to like Trader Vic's and Gem City Records, and Second Time Around, I think, was still around. It was like a handful of places. Network was still a thing downtown. So I would go to those places and drop them off, and I would just stream of consciousness, kind of right, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I've been buying. I was buying a lot of 7-inches and really into what was going on in town. And so I was already doing this. And then I read an article in the Dayton Daily News that said, this couple is starting up a newspaper in town called the Dayton Voice, and they're looking for writers. And I'm like, well, wow, okay. I contacted them. I sent them, here's what I've been doing. They're like, well, we need somebody that knows about music, that can write about music. You were in Guided by Voices? They're kind of a thing. I'm like, yeah. So it was literally that easy, But as it turned out, too, Marianne McMullen, who was one of the people who ran the paper, her brother actually worked in human resources at Standard Register, which is crazy. They both were not from the Dayton area. They'd moved here. So just a weird coincidence. But so once I started working there, I was there almost 10 years. I was the music writer. I did regular columns. The first story I ever did for the Dayton Voice was on Brainiac. Excuse me, when their first record came out. So, I mean, I didn't cover the singles because those were already, well, I did in my little fanzine. But, I pretty much, covered their whole career. Was close friends with those guys, still close friends with them, love them a lot. Still love the music a lot.
Well, you were a member of one of the biggest bands. They were of the '90s. There's two big bands that came out of Dayton, and you were a member of one, and they were the other one, Brainiac. Yeah. So, Swearing and Motors was a pretty big band, also.
But certainly we're not going to try to say that we're anything like Brainiac or Guided by Voices. We wouldn't say that, but totally inspired by both of those groups. And do we need a break?
No, we're good.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if he's giving us the high sign. Sorry about that. What was I going to say? Oh, so Dave lived with Tim Taylor. Like when the whole time I was at Swearing Motors, he lived with Dave and Tim lived together. They had a house on Main Street. And Dorsey Fife, who was like the music director at WXY 97X, lived there too. So it was this big house, and we had shows there, and we practiced there and recorded there.
You had like the Grateful Dead house on Haight Street, right?
It really was. I mean, we had some really great shows there, and Brainiac would work. They'd be working on songs there. John Schmerzel worked there for a while. Neil Blender, the pro skateboard guy, artist with Alien Workshop and all that. He lived there. It was a cool place, and a lot of stuff went on there for a while. The guys in Concord Frequency, the rap hip hop group, they lived upstairs. They were like a full band with rappers and really good. But they used to get in major fights. Pretty
People
funny.
need to check them out. They were great. I absolutely know who they
Yeah,
are.
and we could talk about Dayton hip hop in the '90s too. Like the whole time the rock thing was going, the hip hop thing was huge too. You know, it was
Oh.
like, and there were times where we'd be on the same bills. Like with Swearing at Motorists, we played with Commandos and people like that. And
Well, the late '80s and the early '90s. I take it all. We're gonna take it all to this. Is there's a movie called Judgment Night, and they were the first ones that took the rap and the kind of the hardcore and mixed it together, and it kind of everybody was doing that. I just we could get into that. That's a whole show about the Dayton hip hop scene and the funk scene. Um, so you start writing for The Voice. That's where we're gonna leave it here. We're gonna take a little short break. Please hit the subscribe button if you like what you see. Well, this is Jimmy. This is Don Thrasher. We'll be right back with everything under the sun.